fellow Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to another episode of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by my co-host, Adnan Ikic, and our special guest tonight, Aaron Freeman, formerly at Falcons, still at Falcons on Blue Sky, but at Locked On Falcons on the former, Twitter, X, Hellscape, whatever site it's called these days. So welcome to those guys. Tonight we are going to be covering the make or break players for the Falcons this year in the 2025 season. Obviously, that's going to include some of the critical ones that I'm sure everyone can guess, like Michael Penix, for example, which Aaron's whiteboard is going to, I think Aaron's definitely on board with Penix, I think based on what I can see on the whiteboard there. But we're also going to talk about some under-the-radar names, some guys that maybe you're not considering that could have very important roles in either the success or ultimate failure of the Falcons in 2025. So that'll be tonight's show. Before we get to that one, of course, welcome in Aaron Freeman. Welcome back. Aaron, how has the summer been treating you thus far?
It's been fine. It's hot. It's rain sometimes, so that's good, I guess. There's a lot of football to get to between now and the start of training camp. So doing it every day on Locked On Falcons. So we're here.
Just grinding it out. This is the hardest time of the year because it's kind of that zone where there's not really anything interesting coming up, and it's kind of too early to really start the training camp talk like in full blast. But so you're tempted to go to the training camp well now, but then it's like, well, what am I going to do in the week leading up to training camp? I'm just going to talk about it again. It's not as big of an issue here. We're not doing daily, but I feel for you is what I'm trying to say. You're grinding it out on the content, in the content mines, and we appreciate all your work, because we got to have something to listen to every day, and Aaron's doing a lot of work to make that happen, so we appreciate you, Aaron.
Appreciate it.
Also, of course, for the last time for a couple weeks, Adnan Ikic with us. He's at Say Which Way. He's going to take a little bit of a pre-training camp siesta here. Adnan, welcome back. How are you doing tonight?
Doing well. Yeah, no, it's we're 1 month closer to actual football, 2 more weeks before training camp, and yeah, this is probably going to be my last show right before training camp. I'm going to go on a little bit of a vacation, so time that right in time before football starts.
Yeah, it was good timing because let's be honest, these weeks probably the right time to take a vacation. So I respect it. So we'll have to persevere without Adnan for a few weeks, but we'll do our best to fill the void with some guests and other folks. Dave Choate even threatened to come on the show, but he said he would only do it once Adnan was gone. So obviously,
I know how that works.
Yeah,
I did call Dave out on that. I haven't seen him on the show since the draft, and yeah, no, he's a great timing on his part as well.
Yeah. So, whatever we have to do to get Dave on the show, I guess, if Adnan has to take a vacation or whatever it takes, really, we'll get it done here. But we're going to talk about a lot of great stuff tonight, guys, the make or break players for this Falcons team, and going to have a lot of great discussion on that. Before we get to it, I want to bring you guys a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is the number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball is in full swing, but we're not going to spend any time talking about the Braves. It's just better if we don't, right? But football season is right around the corner, so we don't have to, hold out on that topic for too much longer. BetOnline's also, of course, got MLB, like we said, UFC, tennis, even if you're a tennis aficionado, and they've got all the NFL futures rolling over there. So if you're trying to get the earliest odds on like Defensive Player of the Year or Conference Champion in the NFC or AFC or any of that stuff, playoff odds, division odds, all that stuff available over at BetOnline. They've got the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting options while the games are being played. In between games, you can hit up BetOnline's casino, where they've got all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, live slots, blackjack, all that stuff. So you can head to that website. It's betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to take advantage of the latest promotions and their new industry-leading VIP loyalty program, where they've got level up bonuses, weekly cash boosts, all that stuff. So definitely check it out, guys. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking, of course, about the make or break players for the Falcons, the guys that we think are critical to this team's success or failure probably going to try to lean more towards the success side of things, right? I think that's more fun. But the other side of the coin is these guys are, if they're that important to the team's success, probably equally important to whether the team is successful or ends up falling short of the playoffs yet again this year. So we're going to get to that. Real quick, want to give you guys an update on training camp. I know for a fact Adnan is good to go. And I think, Adnan, you'll be there for maybe the first week and second week of training camp at this point?
Yes. So I think technically the second week ends on what is it, like a Wednesday?
I think
like,
so. Yeah.
Like a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Mm.
They're only doing one weekend, like just weekend practices one time. So yeah, I should be there from that first Thursday and then through technically the second week, which the second week ends very early on in the week.
Yeah. So Adnan will be there. Yeah, there goes the PTO.
I will be there for the 2 joint practices against the
Yes.
Titans as well.
Excellent. And I will be there from, I think, starting with Thursday's open practice through, I believe, Sunday's open practice. I may be able to stay through Tuesday's practice. Still figuring that out, but we'll have both of us there for at least a few days. So if you're trying to figure out when to come to Atlanta for training camp, or if you're already in Atlanta, that first weekend is when you'll get to see Adnan and I. I believe I'll be on the hill. Adnan will be on the sideline, so we'll get 2 angles of coverage for you guys and be lots of good stuff there. We're also hard at work on getting our fan meetup going, and we're definitely doing it. We're trying to figure out the details of the venue, but we're already in talks with multiple places at the moment. And we're definitely going to be doing it. And again, it's probably going to be that weekend. So I believe that would be like July 26th and 27th. One of those 2 days. We might do multiple small events, that sort of thing. But if you're interested in coming, you really want to be there for that. I'm trying to give you guys as much warning as possible. Aim for that weekend. One of those 2 days is likely to be the live show / fan meetup event. And we'll get you guys more details on that as soon as possible. And obviously, if you want to contribute to the training camp fundraiser, we got that rolling now as well. We appreciate everyone who already has contributed. I know it says 0. It's not exactly 0. It doesn't seem to be calculating the YouTube stuff quite right yet, but we're working on it. But thank you guys so much for that. Anyway, in terms of the make or break players, I figured we'd send it over to our very special guest, Aaron Freeman, at Locked On Falcons, to get us started here. And Aaron, I don't know if you want to go for the low-hanging fruit or if you want to take us down an unexpected path, but you got the first dibs here. Who is maybe, I don't know if this is your top make or break player, but who is someone you want to talk about on tonight's show?
Let's go with the low-hanging fruit. Let's talk about Michael Penix. Obviously the Falcons are making a similar bet that we've seen them make the last couple of years, which is we've upgraded the quarterback position, and hopefully this time they're actually right on that. I think what a lot of Falcon fans, like if you went and asked most Falcon fans, like, what have you thought about the Falcons quarterback play the last couple of years? And probably most people would tell you it's been terrible. But when you actually look at some of the numbers, they've been basically getting kind of league average quarterback play. I think, you look at things like EPA and adjusted net yards per attempt or whatever, they're around like 18, 19 over the past 3-4 years. And so it's one of those things where I think the general perception is like, oh, the Falcons have been getting terrible quarterback play. And if Michael Penix comes in and he's, say, the 16th best quarterback in the NFL or whatever, that's a massive upgrade. But in reality, because they've been getting something closer to like 19, 16 is not a massive upgrade. And so to me, the make or break thing with Michael Penix is going to be, is he good, right? Which I think most of us are optimistic that he will be good, but we just haven't seen it yet, over the course of a full season. And then just how good is he going to be? And if the Falcons are just getting above average quarterback play, that is an upgrade, but I don't know if that's going to have the sort of huge boost that I think a lot of people perceive it to be. And so it's kind of like you compare the Falcons to a team like Washington, where like Washington legitimately has had up until this past year with Jaden Daniels, bottom 5, bottom 10 quarterback play with guys like Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz and Sam Howell. And then you introduce Jaden Daniels to the mix, and depending on how you want to measure it, he was either a top 5, but certainly a top 10 quarterback by any real metric, and that's a massive improvement. And so I think with Michael Penix, one of the questions I have is, if he's an upgrade, how much of an upgrade, and sort of can he come in and have a Jaden Daniels-like impact for this team? And the level of play that he would have to reach in order to do that is potentially a top 5 or top 10 quarterback. And I think a lot of people are optimistic that he can reach that. It's just a question of, will we get that with Michael Penix? And obviously, if the Falcons get that caliber of quarterback play, they're almost guaranteed to be a playoff team, unless, the defense is just like absolutely atrocious. And Young Wei Koo is just like missing every field goal and every extra point or something. So something equally terrible would have to happen, in order for, if the Falcons were getting top 10 quarterback play. But the question is, like, if you get, say, the 13th best quarterback in the NFL, Michael Penix, that's good. That's a great season. Everybody's going to be sitting here being like, this is our franchise quarterback for the long term. But is that going to be good enough for him to guide this team to the postseason? And it's like, maybe, but it's kind of on that borderline right there where it's just like, that should be good enough, but maybe it's not. Maybe the Falcons are on the outside looking in. So it's a make or break season in the sense of Michael Penix, his performance, and, how good a player is he going to be? How good do the Falcons need him to be in order for them to reach their intended goals of making the postseason and hopefully making a deep postseason run? All of those are the sort of questions up in the air, but, I tend to be, of the question marks surrounding this team, I tend to be most optimistic about Michael Penix, because I think the path to his success is clearly laid out before, and it's just a question of, do they walk that path?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to frame it, in that, the Falcons are sort of relying on Penix to be a good starter, or at least an above average starter, to continue, the trajectory that they were on offensively, which was quite good to end the year. And the thing with Kirk was, like, when Kirk was actually healthy, especially if, week 1 obviously was bizarre, but Kirk, in his healthy stretch when the team was ultimately 6-3, like you said, was not a bad quarterback. Like, there were limitations to his game, but the Falcons, I think, had built an offense around him that was good enough to win football games. It just seemed like when when the injury occurred and he kind of fell off, the slump occurred, and that was what ended up derailing the Falcons season. But if they could have gotten that, version of Kirk, the good version, for all 17 games, this is a playoff team. I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. So it's like about, like, can Penix match Kirk's good play and not have the slump that Kirk had? And I think that's probably the bigger question. But, in terms of the rest of the offense, I think they've mostly set things up to make it easy for Penix to have this top 15 season that he needs to have for this team to be good enough to make it. But Adnan, I'm curious what you think about this. I imagine you agree that Penix is one of the most critical players. You kind of agree with Aaron's assessment, or do you have other thoughts on Penix?
I mean, of course, it's just by nature of it, it's the quarterback position. It's the most important position in all of sports right now. I'd say that's not really arguable given where the NFL has gone. The Falcons are going to sort of make or break with Michael Penix. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we saw it last offseason. They've been making these moves around the quarterback position, not just last offseason, but pretty much ever since Terry Fontenot got here. They've been sort of, building up the roster, doing their best to build up the roster, in free agency, now in the draft, to the point where they thought that they could sort of overcome poor quarterback play a couple of years ago, and we saw that sort of blew up in their faces. Last year, they made the investment, the double investment in the quarterback position. It ended up not working out because Kirk Cousins sort of fell off a cliff in the second half of that season. Nothing really matters if Michael Penix has a poor season this year. Like, if Penix isn't one of the, 15 best quarterbacks in the league, the Falcons are, I think, going to have a hard time overtaking the Buccaneers in this division, and they may have a hard time breaking their playoff drought. I don't think they need top 5 play from Penix to sort of overcome Tampa and to win this division. That would be amazing. That would be great. But yeah, if he's just sort of, like you mentioned, Kevin, on that Kirk Cousins-esque level before the injury last year, and I'm not demeaning that by any means. Kirk Cousins played very well before that injury. the Falcons will be just fine because I think, would have been just fine if Kirk Cousins continued to play at that level. Yeah, at the end of the day, everything that we're going to talk about after Michael Penix, everything we can sort of look at on the roster, literally none of it matters if Michael Penix doesn't give you above average quarterback play.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's critical that, like, Penix can't really, like, fall off, right? That would cause great problems for this offense. But I think there is certainly, like, a window where Penix can be sort of average at and this offense can be good enough, I think, to lift an average quarterback to better than average stats and play, because we do have, I think, the receiving core clearly to elevate a quarterback. And I think the offensive line is pretty good. And we have Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, who, if they're not the best running back tandem in the NFL, that seems fairly contentious, then they're definitely one of the top tandems. So you theoretically should have a great run game. You've got good weapons, and you've got an offensive line that at worst should be like a top 15 offensive line, right? It should be above average. So I think at this point, we need Penix to sort of deliver on that promise and take advantage of where he's at in terms of all this stuff. And he's still basically a rookie. He's got the experience now of being in an NFL building for more than over a season, but he's only got the 3 full games under his belt. So at this point, we do need to actually see it and see it consistently. But I think we have a lot of reason to be optimistic about Michael Penix. And I think that I think it's reasonable to expect him to be a positive force for this offense, to be an upgrade on the overall version of Kirk Cousins that we got. Will he match his I think what we saw last year from Penix, hopefully we can sort of rein. I don't know if we're going to get the consistent highs. Like, he's not likely to keep like a 10% big time throw rate, right? That would be ridiculous. I don't know that many quarterbacks have been able to replicate that, but hopefully he'll also have a higher success rate overall. The EPA per play will be better, the consistency will be better, and Michael Penix as a whole will be a more reliable quarterback. So yeah, that's a great one to start us off on, Aaron. And yeah, maybe a little bit low hanging fruit, but definitely the most critical player. I mean, I think it's obvious he's one of the biggest make or break player for this Falcons offense, because on the high end, if he's like a top 5 quarterback, has that sort of Jaden Daniels-esque breakout season, then this team could be one of the best teams and could easily run away with the NFC South, easily, quote unquote, but definitely be in the mix in this conference. And if Penix sort of flames out and is more like a Jameis-esque figure for this offense, God forbid, this team could be all over the place and definitely not reach that potential. So important to cover that one first. I like that one. Adnan, do you have another make or break player that you want to bring up for tonight?
Shifting to the defensive side, I want to talk about Rororo. So this is a player whom the Falcons invested a lot in last year. It wasn't exactly a first rounder, but they moved up in the second round. And they used a very premium day 2 pick on him. And, last year he didn't really start out of the gate. There were some injuries. He did show some flashes. Grady Jarrett's gone. David Onyemata looked a lot worse last year compared to a couple of years ago. I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't try to replace Onyemata with a cheaper option, given his, I think, $16 million cap hit this year. Rook is going to be the guy whom they're going to really rely on to get pressure from the interior. They got the edge guys in the draft. Jalen Walker is going to be used all over the place, linebacker position. But they got James Pierce. They traded up for him. I feel like they're really going to try to put a lot on Rook's shoulders to be, the guy along the interior this year to really make that defensive line work and to really sort of unlock a lot of potential from that front seven. And honestly, he's going to be the guy for me where I don't foresee the Falcons defense getting up to that, sort of, below average territory, which is what we've been asking for the past decade. With that, if Rook Ororo doesn't, have a a pretty strong season. I feel like if Rook, flops, and if he plays poorly, then it can get very difficult for the Falcons because they're going to have a very gaping weakness along the middle of that defense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Rook because he was someone that, if nobody else did, I was going to bring him up a little bit later. Because I do think he's critical. I think the team has obviously placed a lot of importance on his role, given obviously the draft position, but just what they need him to be. With Grady Jarrett, you cut for significant cap savings, and I think it was clear that Jarrett wasn't exactly living up to his price, which was very high given his level of production, but his leadership was valuable as well. So there's that leadership vacuum. There's also the on-field vacuum, and Rook is a different type of player. I think he's a very unique prospect in terms of his size. I mean, he's absolutely massive. I mean, you go back and look at pictures of Rook. I ended up making him thumbnail on this show because I knew someone was going to talk about him, if not me. He's massive. I mean, he's huge. Like, he's athletic. He's big. It just, he needed to put it all together. And while he played a little bit last year, we didn't see nearly enough to justify the price that you paid to get him in terms of, trading up and taking him in the top 50 essentially. They need Rook to now be that force that he was drafted to be. And this team has whiffed on interior defensive linemen in the second round, on day 2, like regularly, in the past. So Marlon Davidson is probably the last example of that, right? That another guy that had a lot of hype, coming out. Yeah, Rashid Haven. Yeah, there's too many to count. Okay, we're not going to rehash every one of these guys. Okay, I promise. But it's a thing. Like, the Falcons have tried to get Grady Jarrett a running mate. Unfortunately, he's gone now. But they tried to get him a running mate in the draft and just consistently failed to get that guy. And I think that's what they need Rook to be this year, finally. And it's even more important, like you said, because Grady's gone. And David Onyemata, like, is he even going to be on the roster week 1? I'm still not sure. So, Aaron, what do you think about the pick of Rook here for one of the most important players on this team?
Yeah, I think Rook was probably the front runner to be the first defensive player that we talked about. So, he was not as low hanging as Michael Penix was, but I think, the next branch up when it came to the defense. I do expect David Onyemata to be here this season. We'll see if I have to do an emergency podcast or something in August, if the Falcons cut him or something like that. But I was talking about this on the episode of most recent episode of Locked On Falcons, breaking down sort of, the Falcons going to a wide 9 scheme and what that means. But it puts that type of defense that we expect the Falcons to play puts a lot of pressure on the interior players to kind of be butt kickers up front, because that scheme really basically is predicated on the guys on the outside kicking and spilling everything inside. And so you need a difference maker. And in New York, that scheme really worked because Quinnen Williams was, a plus defender when it came to those things. And I think, while I don't think Rukaroro needs to be on the level of Quinnen Williams as one of, the 3 to 5 best D tackles in football, I do think he needs to bring that plus value in run defense, because if not him, I don't know who else is going to be that guy for you. Like, Morgan Fox is not necessarily known as a run defender, and for most of his career has been primarily a situational or designated pass rusher that gets hidden on rundowns. David Onyemata, at this stage in his career, I think is still a reliable contributor, but is not the guy that can be that sort of dominant force in the interior of the D-line like we saw a couple of years ago in New Orleans in his first year in Atlanta. Now, I think this scheme can help him get back closer to that than what we saw last year, but I don't know if you can really count on that from a 33-year-old D tackle to find the fountain of youth. We hear all this talk of Zach Harrison, playing a lot more D end, and Brandon Dorlus also having that inside-outside role. So when you're really looking at this D tackle room of, like, who's going to be the guy that can be a reliable, every down difference maker, particularly in the run defense, Rukaroro, that's what he specialized in at Clemson. That's what he was good at. It was the pass rush ability that people questioned when the Falcons drafted him, and why people were questioning that pick when they drafted him over players like Johnny Newton and Braden Fisk and others that were much more polished pass rushers. Well, Rook had all the tools to be an impactful pass rusher, but the light bulb never turned on for him at Clemson. But the one thing that we do know that Rook can do well, that he did well at Clemson, and even in his limited opportunities last year, was play the run really well. And I think, we'll see what Rook turns into in year 2 as a pass rusher. I think he'll be certainly an asset in that regard, but I don't expect him to be a huge difference maker in filling that sort of void that Grady Jarrett used to have as your most reliable interior pressure guy. But I do think the area that he can fill those shoes of Grady Jarrett, where Grady Jarrett was really effective being that sort of disruptive player on the interior. And when you look at sort of in an ideal world, like this scheme, this attacking scheme that the Falcons are going to employ, really feels like, man, Grady Jarrett could have used this a couple of years ago, as opposed to what the Falcons have been doing the last couple of years, which is more of a read and react scheme that isn't really suited to Grady Jarrett's sort of skill set. And so I think Root can kind of fill some of those shoes, at least as a run defender. We'll see what happens with the pass rush. But I do think if Rook struggles as a run defender and doesn't fit in the scheme quite in the way and can't give you, again, 70% of what Quentin Williams is giving you as a run defender at the very least, then this run defense is going to be, once again, probably really bad this year. And that's going to really have a domino effect for the rest of their defense, similar to what we saw last year, where particularly early in the season when they couldn't stop the run, teams were able to get into these, third and manageable situations, and the Falcons pass rush couldn't really pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. And, that's going to be potentially, that's the goal of this defense, which is like, we're going to score a lot of points on offense, thanks to Michael Penix, and we're going to play with leads, and that's going to allow our fast, explosive pass rushers that we've added this offseason to really get after the quarterback. But if, the offense isn't scoring maybe as many points, if the run defense is really struggling, and those pass rushers aren't going to be as unleashed as we hope they can be. And I think a big part of that ability is going to be Rororo being a difference maker on those early downs as a run defender.
No, I like the call out to the run defense, because the one thing we didn't really see them add was any sort of like big run stuffer. We did see Lakeil London bulk up to be more of a nose tackle, which he did play some in college, and that is an option if they do want to roll out like a bigger front. But given that I think this is more likely to be like more of a 4-3 look, are they really going to have a big nose tackle out there? A lot of the time, I guess we'll see. But if they're not going to have that, or even if they do, like where Rook is playing, that the hope is that he can be that sort of force multiplier against the run, given his size, his length, and the fact that he did it really well in college and even was able to do it last year. I feel pretty good about his run defense, and I know, we're mostly speculating here about, what could happen. I think we all feel pretty good for the most part about Rook as a whole in terms of his run defense ability. Like that's the part I'm not super concerned about. It's more, can he evolve into the pass rusher we want? But given all the questions we have about this defense, what's it going to look like? How are they actually going to play these guys? Who's going to be lined up where? Are we going to have specialized packages like we saw under Dan Quinn, or is there going to be more generalist stuff going on? We don't really have the answers to all that stuff yet, but I really want to see. That's one thing we'll certainly be watching as closely as possible through camp and preseason to see if we can get any insights into that. But I think if Rook can just be a good, like a plus on early downs that can give you some pass rush juice, at least to start the season, I think the interior will be okay. But like you said, Aaron, if he's not able to give you good run defense, I don't know who else is going to do it. Like, I don't know who else we can expect to be able to fill that role. So they really do need him to step into that role, and I'm hopeful that he will be able to fill it this year, and he's certainly one of the most important players there. Moving on to my choice to get us started here. Well, real quick, I want to get to Mark Bigby's comment here with the $5. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you. Says, this is some Arthur Smith shade, so definitely appreciate that at all times. Man, with Jonnu Smith in that offense, DK Metcalf won't set a finger on the football this season. Arthur Smith just can't help himself. Arthur Smith loves him some Jonnu Smith, all right? Like, those two just belong together. Like, Arthur's like, I understand you, Jonnu, and Jonnu's like, I understand you, Arthur. And they just have this connection, and I'm happy for Jonnu that he gets to go back to that. Even though, I don't really understand why it didn't work out in Miami, considering he was super productive there and seemed to assimilate well into that offense, but the Dolphins just didn't really want to keep him. That whole Dolphins situation is just puzzling to me on so many levels. But certainly, I hope you didn't own Pat Freiermuth Dynasty shares before this move. But yeah, other than that, it's going to be muddy. I feel like every Arthur Smith offense except for the running back is usually pretty muddy. But Johnny Smith once again is going to be like the GOAT tight end pick, like as the final pick of your draft that is just probably going to get you like 8 to 12 points a week, and at tight end that's probably enough. That's probably enough for you. So good. So good for Jonnu getting back with Arthur there. But my pick is going to be back on the offensive side, but it is a new starter, someone that we're putting a lot of faith in, and by we, I mean the Falcons specifically. Like, we're not making any of these decisions. Ryan Neuzil stepping in at center. Now, we did see Ryan Neuzil play, I think it was 8 games or 9 starts last year, something like that, because Drew Dahlman missed a substantial amount of time with his injury, and Neuzil was fine. Was he like a world beater? Did he do a whole lot to move the needle for this team? No, but I think in terms of pass protection, you didn't really see a big drop-off. I think the drop-off came more in the run game, and that is something that the Falcons will have to contend with, and maybe it's something they've been working really closely with Neuzil on to try to improve that aspect of his game. There's no doubt that he's, significantly cheaper than Drew Dahlman. Like, by significant, I mean like drastically cheaper. But he, I think, is one of those critical pieces where if what we saw last year, is sort of the ceiling for Neuzil, and I'm not saying that it is, then how good can this offense really be? Because they weren't really able to run the ball as effectively with Neuzil at center. Maybe, and that may be a sign that they're planning to lean more into the passing game or something else. But Adnan, what do you think about Ryan Neuzil and his suddenly elevated status on this roster?
Yeah, I was gonna actually bring up Ryan Neuzil if you guys didn't as the next guy, but yeah, no, it's he's gonna be, man, a lot is falling on Ryan Neuzil's shoulders to replace Drew Dahlman, who, like him or not, Drew Dahlman was a very good center. Like, I don't know, it kind of feels like Dahlman. It feels like he's still to this day very underappreciated among the fan base, but I mean, Dahlman was one of the, if not the best run blocking center in the NFL. And I know people had, qualms with the pass protection, but even the pass protection wasn't that bad. It just wasn't as elite as the run blocking. I mean, I think we saw it last year when Drew Dahlman went out, the Falcons still won, a lot of their games with Ryan Neuzil at center, because that's when Kirk Cousins was, firing on all cylinders. But we saw it a little bit where the Falcons' run offense didn't really go back to, a higher level until after Dahlman, went back into the lineup. The Falcons' offensive line has been a source of great strength for them the past 2 years. I think sort of unexpectedly, given where it was, years ago, between, the last playoff appearance and, Matt Ryan's last season. I think it was sort of unexpected for the offensive line to elevate the way that it did into what it became. It's been arguably a top 5 offensive line in the league the last 2 seasons, and the line has a lot of continuity in it. 4 out of 5 starters remain. I think last year all 5 starters came back, including Dahlman. So they've been together for a while, and they've had a lot of success for a long time. And now it's going to be up to Ryan Neuzil to sort of make that transition as seamless as possible, where you just lost a guy who got a boatload of money in free agency with the Chicago Bears. And, now it's sort of that next man up mentality where the Falcons saved some money on the center position because Neuzil's making peanuts this year as a former UDFA. And I feel like if he performs the way that we hope that he performs, and if he gives you, 80% of what Drew Dahlman was giving you, 85% of what Drew Dahlman was giving you, I think that'll be fine. And that'll be something where you'll give Michael Penix all the tools he needs to be successful, because the last thing, you sort of need with Penix is to have him under unnecessary pressure, because it's already going to be difficult enough for Penix in what's going to be a de facto rookie season, save for 3 or 4 games. Last year, he wasn't even practicing with the starters until like week 15. So you want to give him every single opportunity to, play up to his potential and play up to that top 15, top 10 quarterback level. And the way that you're going to do that is by giving him a stout offensive line. And the most important player on that offensive line is easily going to be Ryan Newsel, because you know what you're going to get from the other guys.
Yeah, and you feel good about the rest of that offensive line, and Matthew Bergeron could easily be on this list too as a guy that we're looking to take that next step. But Newsel is definitely the less known commodity and the one that's got a lot more sort of on his shoulders as the center. And Aaron, I'm curious what you think about Newsel sort of moving into this new, much more important role as a former UDFA. A shout out to Newsflash for getting this far.
Yeah, I remember when he signed as a UDFA, and I was like, this is a guy to keep an eye on, maybe not to make the roster, but certainly as a practice squad guy. I wouldn't have predicted back then that he would be starting at this stage in his career. But it was at least, a twinkle in the eye, I guess you could say, of believing it was at least possible that you could develop into something, worthwhile in this league. And now he's getting that opportunity to show what he does. And I agree with mostly what Adnan said, where it's like, you look at the pass protection, you didn't see really much of a difference between Dahlman and Newsel, but the run defense, the run blocking was something that was a significant drop off. And as Adnan pointed out, Drew Dahlman the last couple of years has been one of the better run blocking centers in the NFL. And so you wonder, are you going to see that sort of jump from Ryan Newsel this year? And the possibility is there, but really where the Falcons struggled with Newsel under center was in short yardage. They were one of the worst short yardage teams in the NFL during those 8 games when Newsel was there. And then when you look at basically the other 8 games that, Dahlman was starting, they were one of the best short yardage teams in the NFL during that stretch of games. And so that's a big part of it. And, I think given where the Falcons are offensively, and you do wonder a little bit, not only with the pass protection for Michael Penix, but how much are the Falcons going to need to lean on the run game with a young quarterback at the helm, with some of the potential ups and downs that may come with a young quarterback. We again, we're all sitting here optimistic and hopeful that Michael Penix is going to go out here and ball out and be just as able to drop back and throw the ball 40 plus times, and the Falcons can win that way. But there's also the possibility that he's a typical young quarterback, and the ideal sort of times number of attempts that you want to throw the quarterback, it's very similar to a rookie Matt Ryan, which was like, we don't want to throw the ball more than 28 times in a game, right? And so can you rely on the run game to kind of carry you if you find yourself in that similar situation? And I think that's a legit question as we sit here with Ryan Newsel based off of what we have seen so far. I think there's reasons to be optimistic that now that he has an opportunity and the team is showing some confidence that he will be a better run blocker this year, but is it going to be good enough for what this team is looking for this upcoming season? So I think, these are all questions that we all have. I think Newsel's probably the biggest question mark when it comes to the offense, even beyond Michael Penix, because I think a lot of people are optimistic that Penix can actually be good. And I think most people's optimism is that when it's attached to Ryan Newsel is that he'll be fine. It's not this notion of he can be good. It's just like, he'll probably be fine. But it's fine, and if you get the performance out of the rest of the offensive line and the rest of the offense, like, fine is probably good enough. If Ryan Newsel is your 11th best starter on the team and everybody else is balling out, the top 7 or 8 guys are, playing at Pro Bowl levels or whatever it is, then like you'll probably be happy with that. But if, you're not getting that, you're only getting like 2 Pro Bowl type of seasons from, those guys like Bijan and Drake London, and everybody else is just kind of solid, but nothing special. Lindstrom, I guess, with the Chris Lindstrom. I forgot about Chris Lindstrom being a Pro Bowler. So 3 Pro Bowl seasons. But if everybody else is just varying degrees of okay, like, then Ryan Newsel just being fine is probably not good enough for what you need. So it's one of those things where it's like, I think he'll be fine, but at the same time, it is one of the bigger question marks on the offense.
Yeah, I agree with that whole line of reasoning, because I think the safe assumption that Newsel is fine, and that's all fine. That's all fine. We're all fine here. But if we want this team to be like legitimately taking a step forward, they can't really have short yardage issues. And like, regardless of like, I think we could, like, if Newsel is basically what he was last year and this team is not so great in short yardage, they could still be a very effective run team because of Penix's strengths throwing the ball deep and opening things up for the run game. But in short yardage in particular, the threat of Penix throwing the ball deep on like 3rd and 1, teams are not as worried about that because they're just going to be trying to load up the box and dare you to attempt to pass on 3rd and 1 because you're passing up a much higher percentage play and all that stuff. So if the passing game is what we hope and all this stuff, and the run, we can see the run game actually be very good overall, but still struggle in these critical short yardage situations because sort of the threat of the pass isn't as important there. Now you can supplement your run game with passes out of the backfield. We know Bijan's great at that, and Algier too. You can run more short game stuff. That was, I think, one of the biggest criticisms of this offense last year is that they just didn't have a ton of short game, short passing game stuff. And the stuff that they did use was effective sometimes, but other times not so much. I think the screen game with Kirk just seemed disjointed pretty much the entire time. So, they just didn't run a very high percentage of those types of plays. And adding that to the repertoire could help, but I think ultimately we need to see Newsel take that next step as a run blocker. But he hasn't played center that long. He's now, we know that continuity and chemistry on the offensive line is critical, and Newsel getting an opportunity now to actually spend the whole offseason and summer with the first string offensive line as opposed to just getting thrown in there, as like Dahlman wasn't ceding any snaps to Newsel in training camp. I mean, this is not something that's happened. So perhaps with the added chemistry, maybe Newsel can take some steps forward as a run blocker. It could end up being good, but I think the team's level of confidence in Newsel seems like extremely high. So maybe the one place you could say that this team actually has kind of earned our trust is their overall management of the offensive line. I think over the last several years has been pretty good on the whole. I think with the depth, they haven't always made the best depth decisions, but typically the offensive line has just not been a huge issue since Fontenot and Smith took over, and now with Raheem Morris here, it's kind of carried on. And while I think some people think that like Dwayne Ledford is like a miracle worker in that regard, I don't really agree with that, but I do think he's a good coach, and if he's that confident in Newsel that they are willing to let Dahlman walk for a price that was very high, but I think was certainly within the price range I thought the Falcons would be willing to match. I think that tells you that they have a lot of confidence in Newsel, and so now we'll see if that confidence is justified or too much wishful thinking on the part of this coaching staff. I guess we'll find out. But Adnan, I'll give you the next crack here. Who's your next make or break player for this Falcons team?
I'm gonna go not low, but a little higher hanging fruit, and I'm gonna go with Younghoe Koo / Lenny Krieg, whoever wins that kicking battle, because I do think it will be a legitimate competition in training camp and in the preseason, because you don't really know about special teams, or you don't really care about special teams until it becomes disastrous and until something goes wrong. And that was sort of the case last season for the Falcons with their kicking game. Younghoe Koo was 29th in the NFL in field goal percentage, and he was second in the NFL in total missed field goals. And then you also brought in a kicker as his replacement who couldn't kick beyond 52 yards and who sort of couldn't win you that game against the Commanders, which ended up being crucial down the stretch. So, this year, Aaron alluded to it at the very beginning when he was talking about Michael Penix. There is a non-zero chance. There is an unforeseen scenario where Michael Penix, plays his ass off, the defense plays their asses off, and disaster strikes where the Falcons just sort of still lose games because of poor special teams play. And I mean, last season, you look at the difference between the Falcons and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It came down to one game. The Falcons at one point in Week 18, if scorelines, stayed the way they were, would have won the division. You look at the difference between the kicking games. the Falcons had one of the worst kickers in the NFL, while the Buccaneers had a very, very strong kicking game, and I think they were like the luckiest team in the NFL when it came to field goals against, whereas the Falcons, I think the opposing kicker missed one field goal against the Falcons all season long, and I think hit all of their extra points. It's stuff like that that will come down to the margins. I think it won't be as dramatic when it comes to a luck perspective this season. Like, there has to be something that, gravitates toward the mean. The Falcons won't be that unlucky against opposing kickers. The Bucs won't be that lucky. But at the end of the day, if you can control what you can control when it comes to the kicking game, when it comes to your own kicking game, that's going to be one of those marginal things that could just give you the upper hand in, winning what's probably going to be an insanely tightly contested division. Because right now, the Falcons and Bucs, if you look at it on paper, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen this season. We'd like to think the Falcons are going to, be a superior team and win this division finally for the first time since 2016. But on paper, objectively, there's not too much separating these teams. And, the field goal kickers could wind up being the difference, because that's what wound up being the difference last year.
Yeah. No, that's a great point to bring up. And it's that the Falcons obviously got a down year and kind of a mid-season slump, in particular from Younghoe Koo at probably the worst possible time, where it kind of coincided with Kirk Cousins' fall off, and like literally cost them, the Saints game, where like Kirk was able to like do enough to get them in position basically to win that game, and Koo just missed, so many kicks, and that was obviously one loss, and the kicking game caused problems in other games as well. So that's a good one to bring up. And Aaron, I know you have feelings about this kicking game too, but how are you feeling about the Younghoe Koo situation going into the season?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if he bounces back, right? I'm optimistic. I'm a Younghoe Koo guy. I feel like, last year was the outlier when it comes to his body of work here in Atlanta, and I think there's every reason, like Raheem Morris and company seem to believe that he'll bounce back, but we don't really know that, right? And we'll just sort of have to see, Koo is not at an age, he's only like 30, 31 or whatever. And, we had Matt Bryant till he was like 41. And, you see plenty of kickers kick well beyond, his age. And, I think this was a contributing factor to some of the struggles, which is him changing his kicking stance is kind of designed to basically put less emphasis on sort of having a big, powerful leg. Like you see it with Justin Tucker, and his fall off was like his kicking stance was really based off of like, I have the strongest leg ever, and I'm going to kick the crap out of the football. And once you lose, a step or, a swing or, whatever, not getting enough massages, I guess, if you're Justin Tucker, because people are preventing you from, going to their establishments because of horrible things that you've done in the past. And so once that falls off, it's done. Yes, I brought that to this show, Kevin. I will talk about it on my show.
It's so weird that it's happened twice, I guess we'll say, with the massage parlor thing. Now, thankfully, Justin Tucker hasn't been connected to the Falcons at all, but until now, I guess, when you brought it up.
We'll see.
We'll see. Right? We'll see. There's still time.
Off to a slow. You never know who's going to get that phone call if Arthur Blank has what he wants to do. So, I think Koo is important. I think Koo should bounce back, but if he's hurt, like he was for a large chunk of last year, that was a big factor in why he struggled. And so you do wonder as you get older, like, is he going to be more prone to injury or whatever? So, they bring in Lenny Krieg, talented up and coming kicker, but like history is not necessarily kind to young, inexperienced kickers, and especially guys that in their one time playing quote unquote professional football. No shade at the European League of Football, but not necessarily the highest tier of international football. But when you only make like 70% of your field goals in your professional, like that's not usually a great recipe that he's going to get to the NFL and hit 90% of the field goals that we grew accustomed to seeing Younghoe Koo hit over the last 5+ years. So I think it's fair to have questions about Koo. I think it's fair to have questions about Krieg. I think the Falcons are betting that Koo's going to bounce back, and if he doesn't, they feel like Krieg is an up and coming guy, and he'll be able to step in and fill the void, but it is an open question. And as Adnan mentioned, and myself you know, like that third phase of the game doesn't get enough attention, but it often can be the difference in, winning and losing a game, especially if you don't have a clear-cut advantage in the other two phases on offense and defense. One bad punt, one bad punt return, one missed kick, all those things that, happen on special teams. Some might even say like special teams mattered, I don't know.
Whoa. Okay.
I've heard that
Calm
once
down. Yes.
So it's one of those things where like it could legitimately make or break the Falcons if they don't get back to having good special teams, like which we've grown accustomed to seeing over these last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree totally. And I think the Falcons are wise to bet on a bounce back from Koo. We do see kickers, just like other players, go through slumps. Just with kickers, it's like so much more public and like pointed. I mean, it's not a lie when you talk about kicker being like the psychologically like most demanding position, because your margin for error is like 0 and teams are very intolerant. So it's actually kind of remarkable that the Falcons didn't just abandon Koo. A lot of teams do that. Obviously Koo's had the cachet here, which is why he was not let go, and he's going to get a full opportunity this year. But a lot of teams would pull the trigger on something like that, especially with the season on the line. The Falcons didn't end up doing that, and there's a lot of reasons they didn't make the playoffs, but Koo was certainly one of them. So I think it's a good idea to give him this chance. But I think with Lenny Krieg, they were at least like, okay, we're going to get someone in here that we're interested in. I know his like workout for the NFL was like incredible, and I guess teams were like rushing to sign him afterwards. But it's like, it's a workout, right? I mean, how serious are we taking a workout? Somewhat seriously, according to the Falcons. I think ideally Krieg is your practice squad kicker, and you're keeping him around as insurance for Koo, and a guy maybe you develop over a few years. So when Koo's up for an extension, if you love what you've seen from Krieg, maybe you do decide to move on at that point. But I think Koo has certainly earned the right to get a full shot at the job again this year. And I think the most likely scenario is that, while I doubt he has like his best season ever, like after, in 2025, he probably goes back to like an average season for himself this year, and hopefully can get back on the right track as a kicker, because he's a fan favorite for a reason. I mean, he's really been extremely consistent at delivering in clutch moments, and it was just weird that he wasn't. Like that was maybe the most jarring thing of all, was that finally it didn't really happen this year, and hopefully he can get back there. But Aaron, do you have a final player you wanna add to this make or break discussion?
Well, it's on a similar line. It's a competition, and I don't know who's going to win the competition, so I can't name an individual player. But I'm going to go with the nickel cornerback spot. And I would, if I was putting money on it, I would probably bet on Billy Bowman being the week 1 nickel. But D. Alford's in the mix, Clark Phillips is in the mix, and I think both of those guys have a legit shot of being, the week 1 nickel for this football team. But I think ultimately, that position is going to be important, because we saw last year where, D. Alford had a down year, and I think a lot of that had to do with teams kind of realizing, oh, this is a weakness, right? We're not going to throw at A.J. Terrell. I think teams tried Mike Hughes, and with, the way that the Falcons were playing a lot of defense with a lot of their off-zone coverage, those teams put Mike Hughes in a position where he had to come up and make tackles. And I think that's the thing that Mike Hughes did so well, that while he gave up a high percentage of completions, he rarely, with a couple of notable exceptions, rarely gave up this sort of big explosive play. And that was a big part of, the Falcons defense. I was going to say the words success, and I was like, that's not the right word to use when we're talking about the Falcons defense. But, so I think that led to teams basically saying, oh, let's try D. Alford. And they kept trying D. Alford, and it kept working, because he was not only giving up completions, he was missing tackles, he was giving up explosive plays. And so I think a lot of teams are just going to do what we've seen so many teams do in the NFL, and we'll see this right out the gates in, the beginning of the season with Tampa Bay. And, we'll see where Chris Godwin is coming back from his injury, but the Bucs have no problem saying, we'll put Mike Evans in the slot and we'll let him, beat you. And we know Minnesota did that quite a bit last year when we faced them with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. And then, later in the season, when you play the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, if he can find a player that he can circle and say, I can attack this guy, he's going to attack that guy. Buffalo, their number one wide receiver is their slot receiver in Khalil Shakir. So we can go down the list and basically say whoever is that week one nickel is going to get challenged early in the season. And if teams are having the same level of success that they were having last year going after that guy, whether it's Billy Bowman, D. Alford, or Clark Phillips, it's going to be a big problem for the Falcons defense as it was last year. And so I think there's reasons to be optimistic that D. Alford will bounce back, from where he was last year. Whether he'll be as promising as he looked a few years ago, we'll have to sort of see. But I think moving away from the Jimmy Lake scheme, the Raheem Moore scheme, with all that off coverage and sort of bend but don't break, and playing a little bit more man coverage that we saw D. Alford, I wouldn't say shine in, but certainly play reasonably well in the Ryan Nielsen scheme, makes a ton of sense. And then, what is Clark Phillips as an inside corner? I know, Kevin, you and I disagree on sort of where Clark Phillips' ideal role is. He's primarily been an outside corner, not only in college and in the pros, but I've always felt like if he was ever going to be a starter in this league, it would have to be as a nickel corner. And now he's getting that opportunity after 2 years of basically being a backup outside corner. And does he earn that opportunity? Does he run away with that position? Or do you have, Billy Bowman, who I think the team probably ideally wants to win that spot, especially given, he's probably a little bit more of an impactful player when it comes to run defense, but you don't really know what he is in coverage, because really the only time we've ever really seen him play that role was like 3 years ago when he was like a sophomore at Oklahoma, which you can't really judge too much, especially going up against, Big 12 wide receivers, which are notoriously terrible in the NFL. So you're not seeing NFL players. And then you
UCF
get like
slander. Okay, excuse me.
I think UCF wasn't in Big 12 3 years ago.
That's 3 years ago. Maybe not. Yeah, maybe it was
Okay.
2. I don't remember. But yeah. Okay.
But-
Fair enough. Yeah.
Dodging that ball. And then you look at Billy Bowman in his Senior Bowl, where he had a good week of practice going in, so those one-on-ones, but a lot of that was going against tight ends or whatever, as opposed to sort of the quick, fast, explosive wide receivers that he may see in the NFL. So it's kind of to me, an open competition. We'll see who works out, but hopefully through the power of competition, whoever does wind up winning that competition, we can expect at least decent play out of. I don't think you need to have the world's greatest cornerback, but if you just can get like league average cornerback play or nickel cornerback play, I think that goes a long ways to really solidifying what was a major weakness for this defense last year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a critical spot. It just can't be this huge liability that teams circle as like, yeah, we're going after this guy every play if we can. And I think between the three guys, I think moving away from the Lake scheme will help no matter what. But I wouldn't be shocked if D. Alford bounces back. I wouldn't be shocked if Clark Phillips or Natrone Brooks sort of make their case for the spot. And I agree. I think the team would love to see Billy Bowman come out and win the job. I think he's got the more ideal measurables. Certainly he's bigger. He's short, but he's got that safety sort of frame to him with a little bit more weight that could make him more impactful, like run defender, like you said. So, we'll have to see how that pans out in week 1. But I think that position is critical, especially when the Falcons have 2 good outside corners, and teams are probably going to try to emphasize targeting the slot if they can. So having someone there that's not a huge liability would be very nice, to say the least. But Adnan, what do you think about this slot competition that we're going to see?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, that's definitely a big one, because, coaches are so good at just like targeting your weakest points. Especially in today's NFL, these coaches with the analytical movement are just gotten so smart in the past few years, especially over the past decade, to the point where it sort of feels like if you have that sort of a glaring weakness, everyone's going to really take advantage of it. And we saw some of that last season, because D. Alford was very bad. Clark Phillips was not good, and Clark Phillips has never been good in the slot. I feel like his better position is on the outside, but even then he's so limited because of his height, to the point where, yeah, it would be spectacular if Billy Bowman can have a strong training camp, strong preseason, and really, snatch that starting nickel corner spot. That way you'll have sort of filled a huge gaping need in the 4th round of the draft, not having spent a lot of money on a nickel corner. Well, we see that nowadays, like even in free agency, some of the nickel guys are making more and more money to the point where it's sort of catching up a little bit. The same way that we saw some of these other positions catch up the past few years, where you could get them for a bit of a cheaper deal, and now you really can't do that anymore. We saw safety as a premier example. Now the safety market's skyrocketing a little bit, whereas a few years ago it was a very depreciated position in free agency. So if you can have that sort of cheap production from a 4th round rookie at your nickel corner spot, then it'll be sort of a little bit profound for your defense both now and moving forward, because you'll have that's cheap starter for another 3-4 years. But yeah, definitely the Falcons can't get that production that's that poor from that spot that they got last year. And I mean, yeah, D. Alford, he's a guy that a lot of people in the fan base didn't expect to be back. It's not, I don't think it's a guarantee that he's going to be just sort of given that spot. I think the team does really want to make this an open competition, and it's going to be one of the more intriguing competitions to watch during training camp, along with that wide receiver 6 spot competition that always sort of riles us up a little bit. But I do think that nickel corner may be sort of, and maybe free safety as well, because Xavier Watts is still a rookie. At the end of the day, he'll be competing with Jordan Fuller. But I think those are sort of the 2 positions to really circle and look at when it comes to this competition in camp this year.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it is going to be an open competition. I mean, we saw the team sort of hesitate, with D. Alford. He had a chance to sort of test the market. They didn't pick up his RFA tender or anything like that, or maybe he wasn't even an RFA this year. I can't remember. But, they sort of let him test free agency. Nothing really panned out there. They ended up bringing him back, which I think was wise. I think you didn't really want to necessarily keep him from going somewhere where he had a clear path to start, or if someone that wanted to pay him more. But in Atlanta, it's like I think they're open to the fact that, the scheme had something to do with his fall off in play. And I think at worst, like, he's a good depth corner. I think that he's still perfectly good as like your backup slot at worst. But I think it's really wise to bring in someone like a Billy Bowman to push him legitimately with that draft status. And I think they should give an opportunity to guys like Natrone Brooks and Clark Phillips. Even though I agree, Aaron and I see differently on Clark Phillips. But look, if he's not able to start outside, maybe give him, definitely cross-train him in the slot and see if he can win the job there. Because if he's not one of your starting outside corners, he needs to be able to back up multiple spots and be one of your best depth guys, or you're really not getting much value out of him. So I do believe ultimately, it'll be either Alford or Billy Bowman starting in the slot week 1, with Clark Phillips as kind of like the top depth corner, maybe the top dime guy. We'll see. But, I think that'll be one of the more interesting camp battles to watch, and sort of how quickly Billy Bowman can hit the ground running as in that transition to slot corner. And that'll be one of the more interesting things to watch as camp gets started in just a couple weeks. But guys, like we said earlier in the show, camp is getting started towards the end of July. I believe July 24th is the first day of training camp. Adnan and I will be there, and we'll be there after that. So make sure you head to training camp, meet us up there. That first weekend, we'll be having some kind of live show / fan meetup, and we'll get you guys more details on that as quickly as we can. Obviously, like and subscribe if you enjoyed tonight's episode. Thank you to everyone for tuning in with us in the deep, deep dead zone. You guys are the real sickos, and we say that with much love. And yeah, if you haven't done so yet, check out Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live. Also, the YouTube channel memberships if you want to support the show. Leave that 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice. That helps us out a lot. If you haven't done that yet, that would be great. Fantastic stuff. And also want to, of course, thank our guest, Aaron Freeman, for making the time in the deep dead zone. He's at Locked On Falcons on the Twitters, at FalcFans still on Blue Sky. Aaron, anything you're working on you'd like to let the people know about?
Well, I am beginning that training camp preview, going each position by position on Locked On Falcons. We did quarterbacks and running backs this week. We'll get into the rest of the offense next week. Just did a recent episode talking about the wide 9 scheme that the Falcons are likely to employ this year, and sort of how that impacts the run defense and the pass rush and what does all that stuff mean. So definitely a good listen for those people that want to familiarize themselves more with what Jeff Ulbrich and Nate Ollie mean when they say attacking scheme. So all of that is, of course, free and available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts on Locked On Falcons, and still planning on going 5 days a week and from here until eternity. So, if you're looking for Falcons content in this dead time of summer, Locked On Falcons is one of many places you can go.
Excellent. And Aaron, you're doing great work there. It's always good because I need stuff to listen to, and I appreciate Aaron's diligence there. I'm going to have to make some kind of meme about your just diligent podcasting, and I'll send it to you. But yeah, I'm working on a banger, so we'll get that going. But we appreciate your time tonight. Obviously, thanks to my co-host Adnan Ikic as well at Say Which Way. Adnan, for last show for a little bit, we'll obviously have you back. But anything else you want to let the people know about before we sign off tonight?
Yeah, I'm just gonna plug the Falcoholic.com. I am very impressed with Aaron. I guess he's just not talking enough Falcons every single day, so he decided to jump on here tonight to, work a little bit overtime in Falcons discussion. But yeah, definitely check out the Falcoholic.com, and yeah, when I guess I'll be back when the week of camp starting, so it'll be that light at the end of the tunnel, and then of course after camp starts we'll have the daily recap articles, recap shows, and all the fun stuff that we've sort of established the past few years when it comes to training camp. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun summer here as we get to the end of July. We're going to get you guys through the next couple weeks with a similar series to Aaron. We're in the midst of our review series as well. I've got an episode with Alan Stirk, cornerback, coming out on Friday, and then I believe we'll get to maybe offensive line early next week, and then continue on that for the next couple weeks. I believe we'll have Eric Robinson joining us next weekend, and Dave Choate allegedly at some point will be on the show again. So we'll monitor that very closely. But again, I'm Kevin at Falcoholic. Kevin, thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you guys next time on the Falcoholic Live and Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Thanks again to Bet Online for sponsoring tonight's episode. We will see you guys next time. Enjoy your 4th. Have a great holiday weekend. Don't blow any fingers off a la JPP with the fireworks. Let that be a cautionary tale to you. And have a good time, but not too much fun. So yeah. I do wonder how many fingers that story saved in just like sort of that cautionary tale to where people were like, all right, let me be careful in lighting my fireworks. Yeah, I hope something good could come out of it. That's the ultimate goal there. But yeah, quite a story that was. And it didn't seem to slow him down. I feel like he was playing like, a month or two later. He played last year. Yeah. He was like, yep, I'll just wrap it up. It'll be fine. Who needs fingers anyway? Yeah. But shout out to JPP. And shout out to you guys for coming and enjoying some Falcons talk with us here in the deep dead zone. But we're kind of like cresting that middle point of the dead zone, heading back into the light. So we'll get there. And thanks again, obviously, to all of you guys for helping make that a little bit more palatable here. So until next time, guys, thanks for joining us here on the Falcoholic Live. We'll see you. Have a great night, folks.